The history of St. Louis changed on August 9th, 2014, when a Ferguson police officer shot and killed an unarmed black man in the Canfield Green apartment complex. The police shooting of Michael Brown and later the grand jury decision to not charge the officer sparked protests that still continue. So much of the Ferguson conversation can break down along racial lines, leaving many to ask, have we made as much progress as we'd like to think?
I'll start it off, though, with something that we heard on Twitter. Some young people saying, we want to be the leaders, but teach us. You said something interesting, Liz, in the green room there.
For what it's worth, I feel like, as a member of my generation, that we owe young African-American children of color an apology. I mean, I was listening to what you were saying about 18-year-olds saying, why should I do this? I'm just going to get killed anyway. Why should I get a high school diploma? We have left this generation in the worst shape that any generation has ever been in before. Our young people, if they get arrested by a cop that's just looking for them, they can't get a job because they have to put it on their application. I mean, we allowed that kind of legislation to pass. We didn't teach our young people to fight. Thurgood Marshall said after the Brown versus Board of Education, he was like, okay, yes, this is done. We got the law, we're going to win. What he also said was, I didn't realize the opposition to Brown versus Board of Education. In other words, we didn't teach anybody how to fight after the win. And that's what I want to apologize to the young generation, because we did you wrong. We did not teach you how to fight. We didn't teach you the significance of fighting. We didn't teach you that there is a fight after the win.
But isn't this country so much better than the 1960s and the civil rights movement of that era?
Yeah.
It is in some real ways, and yet we're still seeing some real struggle, right? And we have to acknowledge that. And I think to this point that you just made, Paulo Freire, who's the author of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, teaches educators and tells us that education, and a strong education, can actually be the means to your liberty. It can be the means to your freedom if we teach people how to embrace that struggle, if we teach our young people how to lead. But in order to do that, we have to affirm them. All of these messages that they're receiving right now tell them that their lives are of no consequence and of no value, right? Why should I graduate? Why should I go to college? Because Mike was doing all of those things, and yet he's still dead. And so we have to affirm our young people if we want them to lead us, and make them feel a value so that they can say, yes, I am ready to stand up and lead, and yes, you are giving me the right tools to do so.
So I think that brings where racial profiling happens outside of the police department, like in our schools, like when we have IEPs for 3-year-olds,
Absolutely.
when we have kids being overly represented in suspension and expulsion rates, when we have in-school suspension with no real teachers in the classroom. So, she said it was hard because it is hard. I mean, it's hard regardless of your parents' educational levels. It's hard for all parents of color in particular. And so if we were having a broader conversation, we could talk about what does racial profiling look like at school? Right. And who gets lumped into which groups really quickly? And how does that impact their life? How does that impact their fight? How does that impact their conversation? So I think one of the really great things that came out of this is the voiceless got heard. And so this is an opportunity to expand that.
Something else that I wrote down from that interview that Anne-Marie did from the young people, he said, they asked if he was hopeless, because last week there was a tweet that resonated with a lot of people, including Reverend Starsky Wilson, it said they felt hopeless. This young man said he didn't feel hopeless, but he was tired. He said it's tiring. Mm-hmm. And there may be some people that are new to the tired feel, or new to this burden.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I can touch on that. Last week when we were protesting, and I've been out there every day, to the point where I'm tired as we speak. But there was a night where I went back to the protest grounds to get one of my friends that got left behind. We have a rule, no man, no woman left behind. So we went back to get him. When I left, it was a completely peaceful protest. We were marching, nothing was wrong. When I got back, the National Guard had guns and tanks and dogs aimed at everybody's face, and everyone was huddled up on the parking lot of the McDonald's lot, and it was one of the scariest moments of my life. Like, I realized we could have died that moment. And as a person that's registered people to vote, I was one of the biggest advocates of Barack Obama, both terms. And as a person that encouraged people who typically didn't want to vote to go vote, that very moment, I looked up to the sky and said, God, I don't know what to do, God. I can't give you anything else. I led these people to the slaughter. So it's a very hurtful feeling. We try to get people engaged into the system, only for the system to say, you know what, I really don't care about you. And that's what it feels like.
And Art, remember, you asked me what were some of the things that I was hearing out there, and from people in my circle, from people in my generation, people were telling me that they couldn't stop crying. People were telling me that they were in so much pain over this. These weren't people that were out in the streets. These were people that were just seeing this stuff coming back again and seeing mothers losing their children. There is so much pain out here as a result of this, and people can't shake it. It's been a very, very extremely painful life experience.
One of the things that I kept hearing over and over again, people who live in Ferguson, you know, this isn't who we are. This isn't who we are. And it reminded me of a sports term. You are what your record says you are. That's right. And our community is what our record says it is right now, and it's not a pretty picture. A minister a couple of weeks ago, his sermon was titled, "What to Do When You Don't Know What to Do." Do you have the sense that people are searching for what to do, that they want to do something, but they're not quite sure what it is?
I think people are getting organized, though. That's the thing that I will say about the Mike Brown saga, whatever you want to call it. I think people are finally, the light bulbs are going off in people's heads. I see young people every day that come by the office and say, hey, what can I do? How can I do it? Where can you put me in at? I don't think that the situation up close is as standstill of a situation as it appears to be from afar. Even during the protests, people were registering people to vote. People were taking senior citizens to the grocery store. I think that that's the part of the story that isn't as sexy as the other part, so it's not really promoted as much. But you know, it's more entertaining to watch people throwing a brick through a window, you know, throwing a Molotov at a police officer. So that's the stuff that, you know, people latch on to. You don't see that every day. It's not as enjoyable to watch
goodness.
it. Yeah.
You know, and something I saw that you just reminded me of were some older gentlemen. I recall it was 3 African American gentlemen and a white guy. Yeah, I think that was like, let's say 4 or 5 gentlemen. They all lived in Ferguson. They were out there the second weekend after the folks had broken into buildings, and they were cleaning up in the rain. And what I found interesting was they kind of knew each other. A couple of them, I think, hadn't seen each other since high school, but they started getting like, this was entertaining. They got pen and paper to exchange phone numbers. Like, who does that, right? In the rain, no less.
Old school.
But they were feeling motivated to get involved. I'm paraphrasing, but they said our young people need us. You know, they need some men to step up. So
and that's the beauty of it. It takes 80% of the energy just to get people motivated and to have that will that's there. So imagine the power of a movement in a time where people want to do something and they don't know what to do. Imagine what solutions can come out of that if we just listen to the right folks and we get the right movement going. This happens in all movements. It happens all the time. There's gonna be some unorganization at first. There's gonna be some pain. There's gonna be some kind of focus on what's next. And then when you get that next step, if that will is still there, there is nothing that can stop it.
And I think that there's a sustainability to this movement that has never existed before in our history. Social media. We have the ability to, I saw you back there tweeting and taking pictures and doing all of that stuff and moving this conversation along. And because the issue is not an issue that is unique to Ferguson, this is an issue that is a national issue, that helps with the social media to move this issue, to keep this issue out there, and to even change the tone. Social media changed a lot of talking points. Social media has kept a lot of things in focus and will continue to do so. So we're lucky to live at this time with the advent of social media.
the peninsula of the table can be silencing.
Well, I think social media kind of democratizes everything because everybody has the power of the finger, and they're, I mean, they can tweet what they're seeing.
You don't need ad time.
Right. You don't need ad time. You don't need to be somebody who is influential as long as you've got a tool. And in this
something
case,
that people want, and something with some substance.
But this is something I mentioned earlier. I think that the success or failure of post Ferguson will depend less on the messengers and more on the keeping the message going. Because I've said before, the search for a leader, I always think hurts any movement, because then you're depending on one person to kind of tell you what to do. It's easy for people just to do what somebody else tells them. It's harder for everybody to kind of discuss, okay, what are we pushing for? And I think that the success or failure of all of this that everyone's talking about in the soul searching they have now is whether or not people move ahead and push what the ideas are, what the concerns are, stuff that's been around for 150 years that maybe we really need to get solved, as opposed to deciding, who is the star of the week,
But I think that we need to look at policies. I think we need to stop saying, one thing or one group, and really look at what the policies and structures are and change those. We have hate crimes that are federal crimes now because of violence that has occurred. And so if we're looking at this violent moment, if we're looking at it in schools and hospitals and police departments, then we change the policies. And then it doesn't matter like who's the leader, because the whole rule has changed. I mean, we talked about the demilitarization of the police force. That's a policy change, so that tanks and dogs and gas is never used on young people ever again in this country. That's a policy change. I think we need to really look at what the strategies are, not to just change our language and feel really good and hug each other, but like make it a law that this can't happen anymore.
But remember, we have to do the fight after the law is passed, because we have a lot of laws. If every law was followed right now, we wouldn't be here. So yes, we need to make policy change, but we have to make certain that those same institutions have the will and have the content of people that are going to enforce those laws, and we need to remain engaged so we make certain that that happens.
Everything we're talking about requires proximity, right? We have to stay close enough to what's actually happening to continue to be fired up in order to change the policies, in order to change the institutions. It is important that TEF is out there every single night. It is important that 9 Network is highlighting youth voice to make sure that we understand the story. Dr. Jason Purnell at WashU likes to call it intensive listening. We have to intensively listen to what's happening such that we don't let this thing fade out, and that we actually have the fuel and the fire to keep pressing on those systemic issues.
Take us home, Art.
One of the conversations that's been taking place is started with the realization that out of 53 police officers in Ferguson, only 3 of them were African American. And you made an interesting observation the other day when I interviewed you. You said diversity of the police department is fine, but if you don't change the institutions and the way those institutions interact with the public, it lessens the impact of that diversity.
Yeah, right. I don't. That would be a welcome first step. I said this last week when I was here. It'd be a welcome first step to add African American officers to the Ferguson Police Department and to have elected officials be more reflective of the population. But if you just do that, you're not changing the structures that are already in place. And I would give you an example of Pine Lawn, where, based on our study, there's a black mayor, a black prosecutor, and a black judge, and they have the exact same problems that Ferguson does, and that Bell Ridge does, and that Florissant does. So it's not just having people of color and being part of the conversation, it's changing the broader system. And the danger, I think more or less what we're talking about is getting co-opted by the system. Like there's one step to fight to get into it, which is an important first step. And then there's, I'm in it, and it's a feather in my cap to be a judge. It's a feather in my cap to be a prosecutor, and I don't want to lose that because it's some money and it's some power. And if you don't keep fighting after that, it won't change the structure. That will not change the structure at all.
What's the old statement? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
Right.
Art, last word. I think we've run out of online time. Who knew?
Can you do that?
The backs of the men that are holding the cameras certainly have a limited capacity.
Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, this is a defining moment for our local community, for our region, for our country. And the unanswered question right now is, will we seize the day? Will we take advantage of this opportunity, or will we let it pass?
I believe so. I mean, you see an energy in young people that we haven't seen ever. I mean, people have come from all over the world, not just the country. I've seen people in Palestine post hands up, don't shoot pictures. And people in Brazil through Mike Brown rallies. And I think that's because oppressed people all over the world have been waiting for oppressed people in America to say, hey, we identify with you. We know what you're going through. We have your back. And now I think this sets a different tone for a different generation. I think definitely this will continue in different forms and fashions.
Stay Tuned produced 3 episodes dedicated to better understanding the situation in Ferguson as well as the larger issues regarding race. This story has captivated the entire nation and was the catalyst for protest all over the country and even worldwide.